Thank you, Nina. Unfortunately, I couldn't be here yesterday to hear Norm Augustine's presentation, and so I had to give some thought to what I would say so that I don't just repeat what he said. Although I have heard Norm speak about rising above the gathering storm on many occasions, and so I'm sure he thoroughly covered the substance of the report. So what I thought I might do is a little color commentary. Some of the circumstances leading up to the report, some of the things that you might not normally hear in a presentation about it. So I hope that, well, I know that some of you are going to know things that I'm about to say, so I hope I don't bore you, but I thought that would be better to be bored that way than to be bored by hearing the same substance that Norm talked about just yesterday. So let me start with a few words about the National Academies, the authoring organization for Rising Above the Gathering Storm. There are academies of science and engineering all around the world. They are principally honorific organizations. It is an honor to be elected to the Royal Society in London, for example. 1863, right smack dab in the middle of the Civil War, 50 Americans got together and decided that we ought to have one of those academies too. This was a point in our history where we were still a little bit jealous of our more sophisticated brethren across the pond, and so we were going to demonstrate that we were sophisticated too by having one of these academies. So they formed a private, now 501c3, nonprofit corporation called the National Academy of Sciences. And they incorporated in the District of Columbia. Now, of course, until about 25 years ago, the District of Columbia didn't have a city government. The federal government acted as the city government. So our Articles of Incorporation, in fact, are a bill that passed through Congress and was signed by Abraham Lincoln, which is kind of neat. By the way, the whole corporate charter is 2 handwritten pages. Can you imagine a legal document, any legal document nowadays, being 2 handwritten pages? Anyway, it's kind of neat that Abraham Lincoln signed the Articles of Incorporation, but what's really important and relevant to what I have to say today is that the Congress decided that we would have 2 missions. One is the honorific mission, but the other is advising the nation on issues of science and technology. And so nowadays, by the way, what was originally the National Academy of Sciences is now 3 academies: the Academy of Sciences, the Academy of Engineering, and the Institute of Medicine, all of which operate under the same corporate charter. And by the way, Nina mentioned the National Research Council. That is the operating arm of the National Academies and is governed by the 3 honorific organizations, NAS, NAE, and IOM. It is interesting that the federal government utilizes the academies quite heavily. They ask us questions. We put together distinguished committees which deliberate on average 18 months. The members of the committees serve pro bono, they're not paid. They are very carefully vetted to make sure that they have no conflicts of interest. They literally are the best people in the country for whatever the topic is. And they produce a report that sort of averages 200 to 300 pages. It is a fact-based report. We are not interested in people's opinions. If the question we're asked can't be answered on the basis of fact, we declined to do it. We produce one of those reports every working day. Got that? At any given moment in time, there are as many as 10,000 of these volunteers working away on some 600 or 700 reports that are in progress at any given point in time. And so it's being president of the National Academy of Engineering, the honorific side of it was easy. Managing 1,200 employees, providing the secretariat function for 10,000 volunteers, who, by the way, can be very prickly people, is the more challenging part of the job. The particular report, Rising Above the Gathering Storm, started life in a joint meeting of the councils of the NAS and the NAE. Council is our board of directors. And Tom Friedman's book had not been out all that long and was sort of the basis, The World is Flat, was the basis for the conversation in the council meeting. We asked one of our standing boards, Committee on Science, Engineering, and Public Policy, to put together a workshop. Senator Lamar Alexander came and spoke to that workshop and attended most of it, as a consequence of which we got a formal request from Senator Alexander and Senator Jeff Bingaman, later joined by Sherry Boehlert and Bart Gordon from the House, to do a report on this issue. What does the United States have to do in order to prosper economically in the 21st century? We put together a committee, an absolutely stellar committee. It had 6 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, 3 Nobel laureates, 4 university presidents, 1 national lab director who now happens to be the Secretary of Energy, and 4 previous presidential appointees in various parts of the government. They produced the initial draft of the report in just 10 weeks, an absolutely record-breaking pace for the national academies. We're usually faulted for being too slow. And that preliminary draft was issued on October the 10th of 2005. At one point, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the reaction to the report in just a minute, but at one point, I did a quick count of how many other reports had been issued addressing the same general issue, and I found 15. Okay, so this was not a unique report. But what does it say? Actually, I thought the synopsis from a different report is one of the best indicators of what Rising Above the Gathering Storm said. This comes from a report issued by the American Electronics Association, and let me read it to you. We are slipping. Yes, the United States still leads in nearly every way one can measure, but that does not change the fact that the foundation on which this lead was built is eroding. Our leadership in technology and innovation has benefited from infrastructure created by 50 years of continual investment, education, and research. We are no longer maintaining that infrastructure. Pretty sobering statement. The second thing that the report said is that the traditional strength of the United States has been its ability to excuse me. Yeah, right. The traditional strength of the United States has been its ability to innovate, and the direct answer to the question we were posed what does the US have to do in order to prosper in the 21st century, is to shore up and bolster that ability to innovate. 4 specific areas were mentioned in Rising Above the Gathering Storm. The first one is you've got to have the people. You've got to have the workforce. Therefore, education, and especially K through 12 education, needs to be supported. Second, you have to attract the best and the brightest from around the world. That has to do with things like visa policy, export controls, and financial support. Third, research funding. You got to have the people, but you also have to have the ideas. And the report noted that particularly research funding for the physical sciences and engineering has lagged behind. We've increased funding for research in the life sciences extensively. And then there are a whole host of other things that go to make up the ecology of policies, laws, regulations that support innovation. Things like the R&D tax credit, corporate taxes, simply broadband communication. So, now these recommendations are not unlike those made in the other 15 reports. Certainly one of the lessons learned for me was the old statement about timing is everything is applicable here. True, we had an extremely credible committee. We, the academies, have a well-earned reputation for authoritative, independent reports. But nonetheless, we did hit the sweet spot on timing. And the reaction as a consequence was quite astonishing. Staffers on the Hill said they had never seen anything like it. In all their years on the Hill, they had never seen anything like it. We had something like 8 full committee hearings devoted just to this report. We were invited to speak to the R&D caucus on the Hill. Senator Frist put together a dinner for the president, for the three presidents, and the leadership of both the House and Senate. One of the most remarkable things, I think, was Senators Alexander and Bingaman devoted 2 hours a week for several months to do their, quote, homework. And the three presidents would go over, participate in these sessions, and go through the report, not quite line by line, but certainly section by section. They really wanted to have an in-depth understanding. Both Vice President Cheney and President Bush were briefed on the subject. Karl Rove briefed the presidents of the Academy on what the administration was doing about it. There were parallel bills in the House and Senate. At one point, the Senate bill had 69 co-sponsors. Now, there are only 100 senators, okay? 69 co-sponsors, and almost evenly split between Republicans and Democrats. I can't remember which way it went, but it was 35 of one and 34 of the other. So one of the really rare instances of bipartisanship in the last decade or two. The bills were discussed in the 2006 State of the Union address. I mean, it just thing after thing after thing reinforced how much impact this was having. But there's a not so happy side to the story too. The next question you have to ask is, did anything happen? The answer is yes and no. We got a very strong authorization bill, but no appropriation. Now, for those of you who are not denizens of Washington, D.C., an authorization bill is one that says, if you had any money, you would be allowed to spend it on XYZ. Appropriation bill says, here's the money. So we have authority, the country has the authority to spend money on the recommendations of Rising Above a Gathering Storm, but with one recent exception, no money. The recent exception is that we have finally stood up ARPA-E. That was a recommendation in Rising Above the Gathering Storm. ARPA-E is intended to be a DARPA-like entity, but in the Department of Energy. And that has just been stood up within the last few months. I guess another question one ought to ask is, will the recommendations actually spur innovation? And this is just, what you're about to get now is Bill Wolf's opinion as opposed to anything else. I certainly believe that there needs to be a vibrant research base. I certainly believe that there needs to be an educated workforce. But there are a whole lot of other things that support innovation that is not in that list. There's got to be a culture that permits risk-taking, that promotes risk-taking. There has to be patient capital available to the entrepreneur. The tax laws need to reward investment. There must be adequate and appropriate intellectual property protection. There must be laws and regulations that protect the public while also encouraging innovation. Maybe I need to explain that last one just a little bit. While I was president of the Academy, one of my members came to me, not quite in tears, but clearly very upset. There's a man who's very wealthy, serial entrepreneur, in the medical device arena. And he had recently branched out into actual medicine. And he explained, now, I'm just repeating what he told me. I don't know this for first-hand facts. But what he said is, one of his companies had developed a very effective vaccine against cancer. Now, I need to rush to explain something I didn't know. I always thought of vaccines as something you gave to a person before they got sick that would prevent them from getting sick. No. A vaccine is something which stimulates the immune system. And so, in particular, the vaccine that they had developed is at the cutting edge of what people call personalized medicines. You make the vaccine for an individual person, for an individual tumor. It will be effective for that person against that tumor, but not necessarily for anybody else or for any other kind of tumor. But, he said, it's extremely effective against things as virile as prostate cancer, not prostate cancer, pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer, which has a survival rate under 5%. And he said, under current law, it can never be sold in the United States. Why? Because to be approved by the Federal Food and Drug Administration, you have to be able to do randomized, double-blind clinical trials. Not possible to do for a vaccine that only works for a single individual person against a single individual tumor. So there are things we need to fix. I can't tell you how pleased I am. I'll give you a couple of reasons why. That IEEE is stepping up to the report Rising Above the Gathering Storm. After we issued it at the Academy necessarily had to stand back. One of the reasons why the Academy is effective is that it is seen not to be an advocacy group. That means that other people had to step forward. And that happened for a while, but it has slacked off. I am very hopeful that IEEE will follow through on this report. A couple of observations from 11 years at the nexus of science, engineering, and public policy at the academies. Actually, I was quite surprised at how many public policy issues have a technical dimension. I don't have an exact number, but it's like a third, maybe as many as half. I was also surprised and frankly discouraged at how few Americans understand enough science and engineering to meaningfully talk about these public policy issues. Some really bad public policy happens as a result from time to time. But I'm also disturbed by how few scientists and engineers get involved in the formation of public policy, except for the physicists, which, coming out of World War II, have been fairly active in public policy, the public policy arena. Most scientists and engineers are not. I can't tell you how often at the Academy I would have one of my members say, "Oh, that's not a technical issue. I don't have anything to contribute to the discussion of that." In a lot of cases, that's hooey. For example, when we imposed really restrictive visa options after 9/11, most of us have worked with people who were born in another country. Many of us know that something like 30% of the startup companies in the Silicon Valley area have a founder who was not born in the United States. We have a lot to say about issues like that, and yet we tend not to step forward. I'm going even faster than I thought I was going to, because the next line on my note says, "In closing," June the 5th, 2006. This is about 6 months after the final version of Rising Above the Gathering Storm was issued. I was in Beijing. I was in Beijing to attend the annual meeting of the Chinese National Academy of Engineering. Turns out that, unlike here in the US, the Chinese Academy of Sciences and Academy of Engineering hold their annual meetings at the same time. And so they have a shared opening session. That opening session is held in the Great Hall of the People, essentially their Parliament building. It's enormous. It's just off of Tiananmen Square. I was told that the main floor seated 3,000 people. there were about a dozen of us non-Chinese there. So here I was on the floor of the Great Hall of the People with 2,988 of the finest scientists and engineers in China. But what was really impressive was the dais, the people on the dais. They were the President of China, Prime Minister of China, and every single member of the Politburo. Roughly 15 of the most powerful political figures in China. The President, President Hu, gave the keynote address. And he started out by saying, the subject of my address will be what we need to do in order to turn China into an innovation-driven country. He then proceeded, I think he was reading directly from the text of Rising Above the Gathering Storm. And everybody else on the dais was nodding yes as he said all of this. And I'm sitting there thinking, you know, at that point, we had not even gotten the authorization bill through Congress. And up there were the roughly 15 people who could make it happen. And in fact, have made it happen. It's built into their current 5-year plan. And they are putting money to it. For those of you who have been to China recently, you know what they're doing with their universities, for example. On one of my last trips there, toured the new computer science building at Tsinghua University. And I don't believe that there is a university anywhere in the United States that has the kind of modern equipment that they have. It's just, I mean, it's partly because it's all new, but they are willing to spend the money to make it happen. I hope that Rising Above the Gathering Storm, by the way, the in phrase, the acronym for Rising Above the Gathering Storm is RAGS. So if I let that slip out, you know what I'm talking about. I hope it's not just a feel-good document. It's been out for 4 years now. The momentum has clearly subsided. If the engineering professional societies and IEEE in particular gets vocal about it, maybe we can get that momentum back. I certainly hope so. Since I'm no longer president of the Academy, I don't have to be quiet about it anymore. And certainly willing to do whatever it takes to help you.